Hi, I'm Maris Kreisman, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you tonight to another excellent virtual event at McNally Jackson. If you go to mcnallyjackson.com and look at our events calendar, you'll see all the amazing writers and programs we're hosting in the coming weeks. So please keep an eye on the site or subscribe to our newsletter to hear more about what's coming soon. There will be time at the end of tonight's conversation for your questions, so start thinking about them now. You can put your questions into the Zoom chat at any time, and we'll get to them towards the end of the evening. We're glad that even though we can't all be in the same room at the moment, we're still able to host events during this difficult time. As we've weathered the pandemic and reopened all 4 of our locations for browsing and shopping, indie bookstores like ours still need more support. And so if you enjoy free events like this one and want us to keep hosting more of them, then just please buy books from us. Throughout the evening, I'll post links in the chat to buy books from tonight's panelists from McNally Jackson. And it's such a thrill to have a groundbreaking, I'm going to say, panel tonight on dark academia. Campus thrillers have always been around, and judging by the enduring popularity of The Secret History, has always scratched an aesthetic itch. But recent years have seen a boom in the subgenre, as well as the rise of the so-called dark academia aesthetic. Why now? We've got a group of wonderful authors to talk about that tonight. I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's moderator, Sarah Weinman. And it's so funny, Sarah has so many different things going on. I decided that rather than use a bio that I would find online, I should just read her Twitter bio because that would be up to date. So she's a crime lady, that's the name of her newsletter. She's a columnist, new at the New York Times Books. She just did her second column. She's the author of The Real Lolita, editor of Unspeakable Acts and other anthologies. And she has a new book coming out in 2022 from Echo Books and Knopf, Canada. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Maris. It's so great to be here and to be moderating this panel. And before we get started, I'm going to introduce our 3 panelists in alphabetical order because that's how I wrote it. So Amy Gentry is the author of the New York Times notable book Good Is Gone, Last Woman Standing, and most recently, I think it was just published last month, Bad Habits. She holds a PhD in English from the University of Chicago and lives in Austin, Texas. Micah Nemerever is the author of These Violent Delights. Trained as an art historian, he wrote his master's thesis on queer identity and gender anxiety in the art of the Weimar Republic. He's an avid home chef and an amateur historian of queer cinema and lives in the Pacific Northwest. Elisabeth Thomas is the author of Catherine House, a finalist for the Best First Novel Edgar Award. She graduated from Yale University and currently works as an archivist for a modern art museum. She grew up in Brooklyn, where she still lives, and now writes. So welcome all of you. It's so great to be talking about all things dark academia. And so Maris kind of got things rolling in the introduction by mentioning The Secret History. And before we talk about this book, which I think next year celebrates its 30th anniversary, which is crazy to me. it doesn't feel like it was published that long ago. But I feel like even though that's kind of where modern day dark academia began, I also wondered if any or all of you had read any earlier books in that vein. So this is where I kind of have to stump for a book that's included in an anthology I myself edited called Women Crime Writers. And that book is The Horizontal Man by Helen Eustace, which is a mystery novel set in kind of a Smith College-like Avatar. And then there are also the mysteries by Carolyn Heilbrunn, the academic who wrote as Amanda Cross. So I just wondered, like, was The Secret History kind of like your first reading of an academia thriller mystery kind of thing? And what are your thoughts on that book and what Donna Tartt was doing?
I actually came at it kind of sideways myself. I didn't read The Secret History until I was like midway done with my first draft, which I'm glad about because I was young and impressionable and I would have been trying to write The Secret History for the next 5 years if I'd read it any sooner. But yeah, a lot of what I was drawing from was sort of Highsmith, which is yeah, less less emphasis on academia, but more on class issues, which is something that I know really is a major through line in the subgenre, kind of class aspiration and tensions. Since starting to work on the book, I I think my favorite campus novel pre The Secret History is probably Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson, which I absolutely adore. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Catherine House actually, in that it's very much like a ghost story about depression, and so it's yeah, yeah. But that's where I'm coming from anyway.
I love that you said that also, because I forgot to mention to you, I read Hangs a Man because you told me to. And
Everybody
I adored
must read
it.
Isn't it good? It's so good.
I forgot to mention it, and it was the best thing I had read in months. I forgot to mention that to you. Oh my God, it was amazing, and it
Incredible.
thrills me to the bone that you saw a connection between them. But I had not read it before. I had read Catherine House, obviously, since you told me to read it only recently, but I thought it was wonderful. The first thing that comes to mind when you say something earlier than The Secret History, I also love Highsmith, but I also thought of Brideshead Revisited, which I also hadn't read until I finished writing Catherine House. But for some reason, I decided to read it last year, I think, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is so evocative and so similar to what I was trying to do with Catherine House, in terms of that feeling of longing and that feeling of trying to recapture a part of your life that was so beautiful, and but was also so emotionally fraught. And so I loved that, but I hadn't read it, but it's obviously a lot older of a book than a lot of the other books that we're discussing, but I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's absolutely a precursor to Secret History in terms of the mood it generates. Hard agree. So
I've been listening to these and thinking that I the only thing I can really think of are these two kind of, for me, very like adolescent reads that I also read around the same time, or actually before, like maybe significantly before The Secret History, but they kind of all make me think of that time of life, which is The Bell Jar and The Group, which are both horror novels, actually. You know, I mean,
yes,
you could really make
absolutely.
a strong case. There's a lot of blood, people dying in both of those books. So I think that was certainly, those are my first encounters with this kind of academic milieu as I don't know, as like a thick environment, you know, for this kind of the friendships there, and just the kind of existential horror. And maybe I'm just purposely blotting out the Catcher in the Rye experience or something, just skipping straight to the ones that spoke to me as a lady. But yeah, I think that's what did it for me.
You know, now that you mentioned it, something about the way you said as a lady, that's something that made me think of it. A Little Princess. You know, speaking of
I'm obsessed with that book.
I forgot. I was both The Secret Garden and A Little Princess. I adored as a child, and I still adore them. But A Little Princess especially, I guess it takes place in that boarding school. And there's something about the headmistress. I could see her now in the long black dress coming down the stairs. It's just, amazing.
That's so
stuff.
good.
Yeah.
I always thought everyone's either a secret garden a secret garden person or a little princess person. So like, but I think you're a little princess person. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, no, that's a great question, because I also have that feeling, and I would actually say I'm a secret garden person, and I also feel that way because it's almost like, do you like the evil little girl or the perfect little girl? And I do like the evil little girl. But I love both books. I think I guess because bad stuff happens to the perfect little girls. So, but yeah, I think they're both wonderful.
Amy, did you have any particular Secret History thoughts before we sort of move on to, like, because I do want to get into how each of you sort of landed in the morass of dark academia, but we'll get there in a sec.
Yeah, I think The Secret History it was just a game changer in terms of the whole genre. Like, I think in terms of taking a coming of age tale, because like a lot of the ones that we just mentioned particularly have to do with childhood and being a teenager and adolescent and all these school age feelings. And I think Donna Tartt's book, you know, kind of used the campus thriller genre, which had been around for a while, but then sort of fused it, like took the emphasis off of these like amateur detective professors that were the, you know, kind of the hero of a lot of the cozy campus mysteries, and sort of moved it down into the world of Catcher in the Rye and Bell Jar, like teenage, kind of grafted the teenage angst onto it, sort of. And I think there was something really, really, really powerful about that. I don't know why at that particular moment it was such a watershed idea, but I think it's worth noting that it did not seem to really bring in a bunch of imitators. And that's kind of like, you know, part of what I think we're thinking about now is why now 30 years later? And, you know, is it because all the people who read The Secret History are now finally old enough to be writing our crime novels?
I think you're onto something with that people who were reading it at the time and maybe entrenched in their own academia dramas were too close to it, and then those who came to it and became academics. It seems like that anyway. But, you know, this seems like a good seg into what drew you to writing about academia in the ways that you did, and sort of presenting your own different dramas in the narratives that you have in your books. So, I mean, Amy, it looks like you're up on the screen. So
I'm always up on the screen for this question, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, I went to graduate school, and you know, a while back, before I was writing novels, I thought I was going to be a professor. I was really on the academic track. And it was only after I had sort of abjectly failed on the market and was in a sort of horrible depression that I really turned to writing novels out of desperation. So I think that that experience was so deeply, you know, was really imprinted on me, but it took me a while and a couple of books to get to a place and to find an idea that made sense in that environment. And for me, I think, you know, I too am really influenced by Highsmith, like Micah. And I have always been fascinated by her ability to portray, you know, the making of a villain, or to give you a character that's loathsome in some way, but but sort of force you to be in that perspective. And I kind of was like, well, like, where could this person best exist and flourish? And I have to say, just based on a difficult graduate experience, and just kind of seeing the environment of like a very competitive graduate program, it's the only environment I've ever been in where I can imagine people killing people. And so it felt like a really good place to draw from. And I think like part of what we'll see as we go through this, I don't know if everyone who writes these books must have some experience of academia that felt dark to them, but I wouldn't be surprised, because again, I think it's a really nostalgic genre, and it sort of lends itself to drawing from personal experience.
yeah, I think you brought the nostalgia up already, Elisabeth, so I kind of wanted to hear how that played into writing Catherine House.
Absolutely. I would actually say one of the things that compelled me to write the book was that I actually had a much better experience with college than I was expecting, which is not to say that it was that great. It had its ups and downs. But on the whole, it was much better. I went in thinking I would have a pretty good time, and I ended up having, I think there's so much about the way the college experience is done now that it's such a false environment in terms of, if you go to a certain type of private college, in terms of like, you're always fed, you can go to any class you want, all your friends live on your floor, and it's just this kind of paradise in a way, and there are real costs to that paradise, but I think it's very idyllic in a way that I think that is kind of unique. I think that it's rare. I think that it wasn't like that decades ago. And I think that that might be part of the reason why the genre has become more popular in recent years, because I think there's kind of this whole idea of like you hear teenagers talking about, oh, I want to go to my dream school. I think that, you know, decades ago, the idea of having a dream school was just like not
Oh, I had a dream school. I don't know about anybody else, but the fantasy of college was of like a tiny liberal arts college was like at the top of my mind in high school. That was a long time ago.
I was very single-minded in high school. I was just like,
I'll think maybe some, I think, but now I think everyone has a dream college. Like even perhaps like maybe I'm sorry, go on.
No.
I was gonna say that perhaps people who would be so inclined to already enjoy school, not to stereotype, but would maybe have an idea of like really wanting to go to a certain school already. But I think that in recent years, as the cost of colleges have gone up and up and up, that they sell you so much more on a lifestyle and of like, oh my God, these are going to be the best 4 years of your life. And it's going to be this paradise. And you have to get the exact experience you want because it's going to cost so much money that like it has to be perfect. So I think then there's just so much emotions caught up in that makes for a lot of fun writing.
Micah, I'm curious about what led you to writing these violent delights, and specifically like setting it in not only an academic setting, but an academic setting of recentish history, like picking the 70s in particular.
Yeah, it sorry, I'm getting an echo of my voice. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of mine, I am so sorry, the echoes.
Because
My
we
brain.
don't hear it from here.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, it's in my head.
Do you want to try and change speakers? Or are you okay to go on? Or you want to just take a little?
I think I'm okay. Sorry.
No, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's not a Zoom without technical difficulties.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But yeah, I kind of I hadn't actually been to grad school when I first started these violent delights. I was coming at it very much directly from an undergrad experience that, well, I liked college, but it's like I was a commuter student. I was going to the college that was close to my house, and so I didn't have that kind of idyllic academic experience that was kind of sold as the ideal, and I always felt a little weird about that, and so that was actually, it was part of the reason I wanted to set a book in kind of an academic setting that in my head as I was starting to write it was a lot more like idealized, like this is what college would have been like if I had been fancy enough to go to a little liberal arts college or something. But and then I went to grad school while I was writing the book, and came to kind of this more rarefied environment as an outsider, who and kind of got to experience what the culture is like in kind of these really competitive echelons, where you have this idea that it's going to be all about ideas, and it's really a lot more about performing the fact that you have ideas, and that really got into the book. Like I got midway through my master's program and basically threw it out and started from scratch, because it's like, no, this is not a book about this sort of adolescent fantasy of myself as a person with deep demons. This is a story about pretentious people who are really, really up on themselves because they've been told they're the smartest person in the room their entire lives. And yeah, that's academia too, honestly. So
I mean, I feel like you before we convened on this panel, you said something that your favorite part of grad school was the way that it encouraged smart and insecure people to try to prove their intellectual superiority.
Yeah.
And I feel like you know, I want to hear from Amy and Lizzie about this too, of just like the disconnect between this sort of ideal of academia where you're supposed to be all about whatever you're studying or this like rarefied air, and in it sort of ends up being a lot more about marketing and selling, and it's like, and yet somehow that's unseemly to talk about, or the way that you, when you write for academia, it's so, I mean, it's so very different from writing for, quote, the trade or, you know, layperson audience, where it's almost like one is frowned upon and one isn't, and you have to almost like unlearn certain traits. So I'm wondering what each of your experiences was like and how that informed the novels that you wrote.
I'll start that.
You know,
Yeah.
just a mouthful there.
Yeah, I mean, in Bad Habits, and I think this is a little bit in Lizzie's book too, the areas of study and the kind of, it's almost there's a satirical element as well, to depicting the areas of study that are so esoteric that you literally can't tell whether they're real or fictional. And someone was just contacting me the other day, you're texting with me the other day and being like, I guess stopping and looking up all the things in your book, all the areas of study, like, you know, there's like duck call electronica, and there's whole, you know, sort of a department of virtual museums, and there's a economimesis and all this other stuff. And she was like, I kept looking these up. And the strange thing is that some of the things that I made up or thought I was making up are actually real areas of study. Others, like economimesis, are, you know, it's a single Derrida article that I sort of just decided to make it this one guy's entire field of study. But at this point, I don't even really know. And that sort of captures a lot of my experience in graduate school. And it certainly was part of what I wanted for Mac, the main character, because she goes into this environment and, you know, it almost doesn't matter whether, I mean, she's attracted by the lure of ideas, right? I mean, I think that is the selling point. It certainly was for me after I got over the fact that there were Gothic buildings on campus, which was like, for a Texas girl, very exciting. But really it was this kind of architecture of ideas that was so elaborate and that I was so unprepared for, that it felt, you know, almost like being in a dream. And then in the book, I mean, you know, in Bad Habits, the way it sort of plays out is Mac, who's this kind of from like a rough background, or like a hard scrabble working class background, kind of comes into this looking at it as a way to escape forever from, not just from like the material needs, because like there's things that pay a lot better than being an academic, but it's actually almost that it's a luxury to not have to worry about money, to go into something that doesn't pay much because it's not about money, it's about ideas, is like the ultimate luxury. And a lot of my book, and I think also some of the other books, are kind of they almost always involve a class outsider as the protagonist, I've noticed, and I read like 50 of these for an article.
I mean, how would they even work as an insider? It feels like it would just be off.
It'd be interesting. Somehow. I would like to see it maybe done. But it's like, you know, first of all, you have to have a fish out of water character just to explain what's happening, you know, as like an audience surrogate. But also, I think there's just a lot of anxiety around, you know, are ideas the real luxury? Are, you know, are like theorists the real luxury? Someone just kind of suggested that to me recently. Like maybe the luxury good in graduate school is sort of being able to wield, you know, a gambin in like an impressive way. So yeah, I mean, but they're all about status. And I think that's where the stakes of not every campus thriller, but like most of these tend to revolve around status anxiety. And that's certainly something that was pervasive in my experience.
I mean, Lizzie in Catherine House, it's not even just about status anxiety and outsider. It's like she's being cloistered away and almost sealed off from the world. So I kind of wanted to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, something I think is kind of interesting. I was just thinking when Amy was talking, I was like, is Inez the main character? Is like, is she a class outsider? I was like, I'm actually not sure. And I wrote it, but I was like, I purposefully, it's so cloistered. I wanted it to be so so tight on the experience of Catherine House that I wanted to be really surreal in terms of the sexual politics, the racial politics, and the class politics. I wanted it to feel almost just like this complete, like, it's a fake environment, you know? And I almost wanted to imitate what colleges are trying to do, which of course they never actually do, is that race and sex and class are always really fraught in college in my experience. But that's kind of almost like part of what makes it surreal in my imagination. But what I think is so interesting reading Bad Habits, Amy's book, was that one of the things I loved was there are all these wonderful scenes of someone talking, and it's like almost like the word mumbo jumbo is not used. I don't think, but it's just like, you know, just academic talk, and it's almost like being hypnotized. It's like being and I thought it was fabulous because it's something that I kind of tried to touch on in Catherine House as well, but I think it's something I think about a lot because when I was researching for Catherine House, I read a lot about cults, not to compare.
I was just going to bring up cults because when I was reading Catherine House, it happened to coincide with when I was reading a book about Nexium. And I just saw a lot of the parallels, and maybe
there's
that's
some
a little too
parallels.
close.
Absolutely. I think I was reading a lot about cults as I was reading Catherine House, and still I do. But I think that there's a lot about the way cults work. A lot of it is based on language. And I think there's a lot about like taking words you already know and divorcing them from the meaning that you're used to that's so discombobulating, and then forcing you to use them in these new ways. And then like, and acting as if that was the meaning of the word all along, and like then creating new, smushing words together. And there's just all these weird ways that cults work with language. And I was like reading all this when I was like doing researching, I was like, this is like academic language. Like, this is how academia works. This is how, when so many times you read like some critical theory article and you're like, they're acting like I'm supposed to understand what this means. And this is like total nonsense. And then there's this horrible moment when you're like, oh my God, now I do understand it. And like, that's not great. That's like not the way it should be. Anyway, so I just thought that was wonderful in that book. I thought it was really well captured. Yeah, and then I thought in These Island Delights, I thought that there was a lot on class there that was really interesting. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, I do want to talk, Micah, about class for sure, but I also wanted to kind of bring the sort of cult, almost like folie de relationship between Paul and Julian, because it's so like, if Catherine House is the place is cloistered, and Bad Habits, it's like the environment is cloistered. Like, this is just like this dual relationship, this two-person world. And I wanted to know, just like in terms of what you did to sort of create that and inhabit it, and what it would be like to step away from it when you weren't working on it.
Oh gosh. I of course have no firsthand experience in being embroiled in weird, unhealthy adolescent friendships that wrap up your entire identity. No, there's yeah, the kernel of the book for me is this thing that I think it's especially common with queer teenagers, and especially common with queer teenagers who have been told their whole lives that they are gifted. That you are very invested in the idea of yourself as like impressive in some way, and that you have to be special. And if you kind of fall in with someone and like an aspirational kind of friendship where they seem like the kind of person you want to be, and they sort of validate all of these ideas you have about yourself. It's like, no, I'm lonely because I'm smart. I'm lonely because I'm special. And this other person is special and has deigned to pay attention to me. Therefore, you know, It's something that I think a lot of people experience in their teen years, as their, whether it's as their actual romantic first love or just as a really messed up romantic friendship. I think it happens to a lot of lonely, smart, queer teenagers. And so that was definitely the kernel of it. And when I was before I went to college, like part of this romanticized idea I had about academia was that it's where you find the people who are smart enough to keep up with you, because of course you're a genius, and like find people who really understand you, both on an intellectual level and then implicitly on a level of you get to share in this rarefied environment that belongs to you as special people. And so it's a very, I think that's part of the appeal of kind of the dark academia genre to readers who are very close to that emotional stage in life, is because it's an intoxicating fantasy that there's this secret place where you could go and kind of bond with people who are like you but better, and become better to match their example. And that is a really bad thing to fall in romantic love with also. So it's just that was kind of the little intellectual environment that Paul and Julian build for each other is sort of a microcosm of the fantasy of academia in general, I think. And
they have their own language too. I mean, that's part of what's so intoxicating about that relationship, right?
Yeah, it absolutely. That is something I've really enjoyed in a book that's sort of dark academia that I read recently is Emily Temple's The Lightness. And it's very much about this little teeny tiny interpersonal ecosystem where they come up with all this jargon and all these ideas that they kind of use for in-group cohesion, as well as to symbolize things that they care about. It's also kind of using these words and ideas as a way to kind of seal yourself off further. And that is very much what the academic environment is like. And it's also very much what it's like to be kind of wrapped up in one of those toxic friendships as a very specific kind of teenager, as you kind of come up with this secret code.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of rephrase the question for Amy, just because Gwen and Mac's relationship or friendship, it's like, it's got so many layers of not just intense friendship, but competition. And I feel like there was just so much vicious competition and bad habits. And then you factor in how the students relate to the professors in various inappropriate ways. So I just, I guess I wanted to hear more about like what you were exploring in terms of the toxicity of these relationships.
Yeah, I think one thing I was sort of trying to get at in all this like network of entangled relationships is that it's less about the friendships themselves and the people, and more about the environment and the way that it makes things, it intensifies and makes things toxic. So there, Gwen and Mac meet in high school, and Gwen is that like aspirational friend, like Julian is for Paul. Gwen comes into Mac's life and suddenly it's like a light bulb goes off, and she's already been a little bit turned on to the idea of beauty and ideas as an escape for her from her difficult life. And then Gwen is this like perfect, and she's Gwen is just like pure luxury. She's like beautiful, she's the smartest, she's the best dressed, and she has culture. And that's like, especially the idea of culture is that thing that Mac like hasn't yet encountered until Gwen. So yeah, I think it's interesting that we're talking about, there's also like a queer thread through all of these
I
books.
was going to get to that.
I
so
knew
let's
you
get to
were.
that.
I'm sorry, I'll leave it for
No,
that
no, it's
question.
fine. Like
It
you
just
gotta
felt,
follow the natural flow here.
Well, but that's part of this, like, there's this quasi-erotic intensity with Mac and Gwen's friendship too. And I think Mac then later goes into grad school and you see that she has like queer relationships. She has relationships with both women and men. But there's this kind of open question in the air in the book as to like, this intensity that she has with Gwen. It's like too ideal. I mean, part of what's wrong with it is that it's so idealized that she can't even think of it in the realm of something as, banal as sexual attraction. She's trying to be Gwen, and so that's another like Highsmithian kind of theme. And it's I think the idea that you're gonna inhabit someone, that you love them so much that you sort of want to be them, and that means they can't exist, is kind of it's an element that might be sort of secretly there on some level in those intense friendships where you're trying to figure out who you are by attaching to other people. So yeah, that is, and I think, part of what's wrong with Gwen and Mac's friendship, it sort of works in high school fine. It's like well enough. And if Mac had just kind of moved on after that, you think maybe things would have been okay. But instead, she's so fixated on like whatever Gwen does is the thing, and that's my ticket. So when Gwen is going to this program, she's determined to go to the same program because whatever Gwen does is like she has the best of everything. So yeah, so it kind of continues this like outdated adolescent kind of intensity. And then once they're in the environment, it's a pressure cooker. So it's just gonna, like, really only one of them can win. Once they're in grad school, like somebody does have to be shoved aside.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's very fun for me to explore. I love writing about ambition. I love writing about competitive people, and I love writing about the kind of environment that turns people nasty, because I think, there's behavior, from my experience, there's behaviors that come out in that environment that, even I, when I was in that environment, did not feel like I was always quite behaving like myself, because, everything gets normalized. Certain kinds of behaviors get normalized. So yeah, that's what I enjoy most. And I like turning people very ugly.
I definitely want to hear more what you have to say on this too, Lizzie. Like, there's so many things that we've already touched on in terms of like the queerness of Catherine House, but also just the way that it's like kind of like natural, just things happen, they don't, whatever. And so I just wondered what you were exploring, and also the nature of inhabiting other people's consciousness, and just more about like the individual versus this larger system, which obviously I think is prevalent in all the books, but I wanted to hear about it specifically to you and Catherine House.
Yeah, I think in Catherine House, part of what the idea of it is that it's, which then, without giving spoilers, it kind of takes on a sinister turn, is this idea of that in this world, like we're different, but we're all connected, and we're all, even the differences that we have don't hurt in any way. We all have different races, we all have different sexes, we all have different, everyone kind of has sex with each other, everyone, without it even really being commented on, not like, oh, do you think he's gay, or like, oh, do you think, and all of those were really deliberate choices that I made. I wanted it to feel just completely like this kind of just a surreal world, and then make that surreal world even more surreal than it was, even though I wanted to also feel really grounded in reality. I almost wanted to kind of speak to what I think colleges are trying to do by making a kind of exaggerated version of that. That's just completely not what it actually is. Yeah, wait,
It's
what was the
almost
second
like
part?
meta commentary on fluidity.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that it's something that I thought about a lot when I was writing it, because I think especially as a Black writer, I think you have to, I think with each book, actually, I think you kind of have to think about how you are going to talk about, well, I say as a Black writer, I think every writer should be thinking about how they're talking about race, the race of their characters, what the environment is, and all of these things, and make really conscious decisions about it. And my conscious decision with this book is I wanted to almost make it, the conscious decision was to have it be weird, and to have it, but to have it not, to be weird in how much it was not commented on. So that was one of the things I wanted to make it feel kind of cult-like. And one of the inspirations actually for that was, when I was researching about cults, I think people kind of have a feeling, an idea of cults as being really regressive in a lot of ways in terms of race and sexual relations, things like that, and which is true in some, but Jonestown was founded, as this kind of rainbow family type thing that took this really horrible turn. So I think there's something that can be very threatening sometimes about this idea of we're all one family and just bring everyone together and then just kind of smush everyone into one family, acting as if everyone's completely the same.
So as no, go ahead, Amy.
I just wanted to say something about Lizzie's book, because I thought that was so interesting, like the way that togetherness and the lack of boundaries between people becomes kind of the sinister thing, like is so interesting to me. And I feel like I've never really seen it quite that way, that's this perfect utopia, kind of turns out to be sort of sinister. And for me, I think about boundaries in that environment being really eroded between, say, professors and students, and between work and self, and I often think that the lack of boundaries is actually one of the biggest stressors in grad school, and one of the things that makes it feel cult-like. But I kind of love how radical you are in Catherine House in just like demolishing every boundary and making that I just I thought it was really fascinating.
Well, I think it's fun because I think every writer in any given story, the writer teaches you, or especially if it's going to be a story that has some type of speculative element, the writer kind of teaches you what's going to be weird in the world of the book, and it's like if you're reading a fantasy book and like a dragon shows up and no one comments on it, then you know that in this world dragons already exist. If a dragon shows up and was like, oh my God, what's that creature? Then you know that it's something perhaps more like our world. And so given that, I kind of wanted to almost with that be like, what if the thing that's, the dragon in this version is that no one's commenting on the fact that it's surreally racially diverse in a sense. It's kind of like, this is the fantastic element, but what's weird about it is there's only like one line in which someone mentions the racial diversity and the like sexual, no one mentions the sexual, that everyone's having sex with each other at all. But I also wanted it though, and this was also something I thought a lot about, is I did also want it to feel very sexually safe. Like I didn't want anyone to have a bad sexual experience, which I think is completely
super radical now that I think about it.
Yeah.
which I think is complete. I mean, like maybe it's like someone that were like, someone's drunk for it, but like not completely not what I think would be happening in actual college with everyone drinking all the time.
So I feel like we're coming to where we can ask audience questions, but before I do that, I also want to point people to Amy's wonderful list of dark academia books that she wrote for Crime Reads, and I wondered, Amy, you should pick like one from that list that you love, but like I also wanted to hear from Micah and Lizzie about what other sort of more contemporary dark academia books have really resonated with you.
I'll just fire mine off right away. These two were amongst my absolute top favorites. I fell in love with both of these books and was so delighted when both of the authors were online and liked to be on Twitter. Yeah, so that's kind of my first answer. But also, if I had to add one to this phenomenal list, these violent delights in Catherine House, Nina Revoir as a student of history has really stuck with me. It's a very quiet book. In a way, it's very different from a lot of the ones we've been talking about. It does have a class outsider as a protagonist, and a racial outsider, but in a way that's, it sort of quickly moves off campus, and its argument is sort of more, it sort of directly relates actually research with fraud in a way that's really fascinating. And it's just a beautiful little book. I really urge anyone who's looking for a satisfying read to pick it up.
How would you answer that, or what are your thoughts on this?
I could.
Oh, Mike, you go.
I already plugged The Lightness, but I will do it again because I absolutely adore that book. It's kind of an interesting fusion of dark academia and like boarding school fantasy, because it's this like Buddhist therapeutic boarding school. So they're studying Buddhist theology at a level that is fairly high. They're also teenagers, so it I don't know. It's a really good depiction of these little like the school itself is kind of a little microclimate of social norms and rituals that are very all encompassing in themselves, and then the main character and this group of girls she falls in with kind of make their own little pod within that is even more, it just, as you go down through the layers, it gets more and more intense. Like the school is intense, the little quartet of friends is intense, and then the relationship between Olivia, the narrator, and Serena, who's kind of the core of the group. It's like this yeah, it really distills that kind of emotional intensity that comes from these rarefied environments, and I love it.
Who's the author again of Lightness?
Emily Temple.
Emily Temple.
Yeah.
Oh, and I was gonna say, I'm like looking at my shelf. I just read and I loved The Divines that just came out.
Yes.
By Ellie Eaton.
She's here, I think.
Oh,
well, I thought it was fabulous. And actually, now that I think of it, we had been talking about a book that's, if there were one written by a class insider, and I guess that would count because the protagonist is, she's a rich little girl. But I thought that was a wonderful read. It kind of reminded me of Prep, but kind of turned on its head in a way. And yeah, I thought that was wonderful.
That one skated into me just past the point where I could read it for my piece, and I was so mad. It looks so good. Yeah. Looking forward to reading both of those.
And the one I want to plug is Lisa Lutz's The Swallows, which came out a couple of years ago. It's set in high school, but just like the level of rage that all the women and girls feel, and just the sort of gender war that erupts is so palpable, and it's so, like, I still think about that book so much in all the time that I've read it. So Maris, can I read questions from the chat, or how should we do this?
Yes, please.
Okay. There's a question from Mary. I was at a science fiction and fantasy con where The Secret History was discussed as a huge influence on fantasy, with several counting it as a foundation text of literary urban fantasy. Is dark academia bringing this influence back into, quote, reality? I'm curious too.
That's fascinating.
It's funny because there's so much crossover. You know, I was having trouble when I wrote that list, trying to draw the line, you know, because I would decide I had the line drawn, or it was like crime. It was just going to be crime novels, and they were going to be grounded. but then Lizzie's novel, and then like some other novels, and of course then I got to Ninth House, and I think at this point the feeling is the world building is the real focus in both of those genres. So I don't know, they're a natural fit to me. Micah, what do you think?
I think that makes sense. I don't know how much smart stuff I have to add to that. I think you nailed it.
Lizzie, have you got anything further on it?
No, I would say I agree in that. I'm almost like, that's a good question. I want to like I would read a paper on that topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. I didn't know that it was discussed that people at a fantasy conference would have brought it out. I find that fascinating.
So this next question from Anna is for Elisabeth. The dissociation and depression exploration in Catherine House was so accurate and immersive. Did you do any research, or were you drawing from experience, or both?
I love that question. Because on a personal level, I can say, so while I wrote it, I would say I was in a pretty depressed place, but I don't think I realized that at the time. And I think that when I was writing it, I was kind of putting my time in college up in a pedestal because I just thought that like college was so great. And then it became clear as, through therapy, it was like, oh no, I can like be happy outside of college. Like it just like it was not related to the college experience. Like, and so I think for me, I think part of what the book is about is this putting a time in your life on a pedestal as a time when maybe you were happy, when actually you're having mental problems with depression that are maybe not related to, or are or not related to the place. But anyway, so I can say that I wrote I'm glad that it rang true. I would say it was written mostly from experience, and that I am much happier now. But I think that it makes me happy almost that when I gave it to someone, like maybe my editor or something at some point, she was like, this is a really wonderful portrait of depression. It was like, well, why did no one tell me before that I was depressed? I could have saved a lot in therapy before I got that diagnosis. But yeah, it's, when I look at it now, it's so clearly to me a portrait of depression, but when I was writing it, it did not seem that way.
I'm also curious to kind of expand that to Amy and Micah about writing through, I guess, whatever mood you were in. This sort of relates to a question that Jonathan had in the chat for Micah about how long it took to write These Violent Delights, and that you had mentioned that you started a draft and had to kind of redo it. So I just wondered, like, what were you kind of working through at different stages as you were for the time that it took to write it?
Yeah, it started as kind of working through the emotional fallout of a obviously much less disastrous, but still pretty disastrous series of fraught friendships in adolescence. So for a while I was sort of steering into this idea of what the worst case scenario could have been. And part of that is like it's sort of reckoning with the idea that I had put myself in both a state of vulnerability and a position of kind of trying to prove myself, where that there was some sort of potential in me that I, in retrospect, was afraid was ominous. And so I was kind of working through this idea of kind of the darkness, I guess, that kind of relationship can bring out in you. But when I first started writing, it was also sort of a Brideshead revisited fantasy of like, yes, it's this darkness, but it's this darkness that is about isolation and specialness. I was still all kind of buying into this story that these friends and I told each other about being special. And as I think often happens in academia, it's a lot of people who are used to being considered one of the smarter people in the room being thrown together and made to fight. And it's and it I am glad I had that experience, because you know, sometimes you got a bit of an ego when you're 22 and you need it knocked out of you. But that was like kind of getting a glimpse into what a more rarefied atmosphere that was very built on this idea of like shared intellectual achievement, like what that actually was like as an immersive environment, kind of helped me realize that These Violent Delights needed to be a book about how being book smart doesn't actually give you special privileges. It doesn't make you special. It just makes you book smart. it's just, yeah. And how kind of buying into this idea that being smart is the most important thing can make you get really emotionally invested, and that is like the core of your identity, and in trying to prove it, terrible things can happen. So yeah, it definitely was a book that was transformed by my experience in grad school, and kind of became about working out not just this fear of the darkness that I had inside me as a teenager, but also like the awareness that I was buying into something really toxic. So yeah.
Yeah, Amy, I also wanted to hear, and then we'll probably have to wrap up pretty soon, just how Bad Habits is in conversation with your earlier two books, especially, but maybe not especially, but to me it was especially Last Woman Standing, where it's like you're taking this milieu of a woman in comedy and the rage that she feels, and then working through a woman in academia and the rage that she feels. So, and because unless I'm recollecting wrong, I think that Bad Habits was already, like, the seed of that was already germinating when you were working on Last Woman Standing, and then you came back to it, or you know, it's been there for a while.
Yeah, I actually wrote 2/3 of Bad Habits before I wrote Last Woman Standing. I was supposed to be writing Last Woman Standing. It was my second book under contract. And I just had this dream, and I got the frame for Bad Habits, and I discovered that it was going to be set in grad school. And it became a way, it was so satisfying to write. For me, I mean, I had been extremely depressed in grad school. That's, you know, and so instead of feeling depressed while I was writing Bad Habits, instead I was actually working through from a much happier place. And I think just putting it in a box, putting it in a story was, and putting all the feelings that were still like left over into this kind of mean but funny story was really useful, powerful for me. So I kind of needed to get it out of my system, and I almost like, puked it up like in 2 months. Like, I mean, I just went on a bunch of writing retreats and just like wrote 10,000 words a day for Bad Habits. And then it was time to set it aside and write my real book. And also, it's funny, by the way, and I never remember this, but one of the dual narrators in my first book, Good As Gone, is a professor too. So just, it's always in there somewhere, I guess.
It's part of the Amy Gentry cinematic universe.
Yeah, like everyone's an English professor in my world. So I can't imagine any other type of person, apparently. So, but yeah, Last Woman Standing, really came out, if Bad Habits came out of depression, I think Last Woman Standing really came more out of just pure rage. And I think maybe rage and depression are often actually the same thing, kind of expressing in a different way. And I think, maybe my own experience was I was less able to access just the pure, unadulterated, like murderous rage. But with Last Woman Standing, which came out in came out in the middle of the sort of Me Too thing, but it was sort of percolating, during the rumblings that led up to Me Too. It was also rumbling in my mind, was about a lot of women I had met as well as my own experience, but I'm not a career comic, and I know a lot of career, and hobby comics. I'm kind of married to one. So I had kind of gotten in with all these, in these circles, and sort of ended up hearing a lot of the girl talk that happens when men aren't around. And I think that it is interesting that when I wanted to put that rage into a story, I picked a woman, another like very ambitious woman who was trying to make it in this art scene, in a creative career. That's sort of where, I don't care who you are, the odds are stacked against you in a comedy career or most creative careers. So it's already kind of you against the world. And for a stand-up like Dana is in that book, it's even more pronounced. I mean, it's just like you alone up there on a stage. And there's no boundary between yourself and your creativity and your work. It's just, who you are is on display to be judged. So yeah, I mean, I think that story too is in a way a making of a villain story. But I think I have so much more sympathy for Dana and where she ends up. Whereas Mac, I do feel more like it's maybe, as Micah was saying, I really relate to that, to what you were saying, Micah, about this is like the dark path I could have gone on. I think with Mac, she expresses more, my fears of specifically something I could have become. So I'm always going to have like a really intense identity with that figure, but also, yeah, I don't know. We'll see
So
what the next one is.
the last question that I have for all of you is, having written these books, would you say that you've worked through what your feelings are about academia, or are there still lingering things that are either unresolved or even that you still love about it? Like,
it's totally over, Sarah. There's no more feelings left. They're gone. Woo.
What's funny is I was going to say I've totally worked through it, and then as I was saying that, I remembered that I dream about being back on campus pretty much every night, and I always have this same stress dream, and it's that I'm trying to pack up my books I'm moving off campus, like the year is over, and I'm trying to pack up my books, and I don't have enough boxes, and that's the dream I have. So obviously there is some type of stress that is still centered on that campus in my life, and I thought I had worked it out, but apparently not. So I guess stay tuned.
Mike, where are you on this? Do you have stress dreams like this, or?
Weirdly, no. But I do. In about 10 years, once I get a little more distance, there's a grad school book coming, like something that is directly about grad school. It's just they're so. There's a bit in these Violent Delights where a character refers to academia as a petri dish of maladaptive behavior, and it's like, how do you get over that? I love that. No, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh.
So.
I feel like that is the perfect note to close this wonderful conversation with all three of you. I think it's pretty clear that we could just keep going for many, many hours, and someday we will convene in person and do that. But thank you to Amy, to Elisabeth, and to Micah. This was such a gloriously wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Thanks to all of you.
Maris, too.
Thanks to everyone. If you buy one of the books that was put in the chat, you'd be doing a world of good.
Please buy all the books.
Please buy all of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful to hear everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Bye.